My daughter-in-law left my luggage on the sidewalk with a chilling note, "Earn your place." I did, and she never saw it coming. When the cab pulled up to the curb, I noticed the shadows had shifted on the lawn. The hydrangeas I had pruned last month were beginning to bloom blue around the edges, and the grass, damp from a recent rain, smelled of quiet neglect. It was an ordinary afternoon in early June. Sunlight filtered through the maple trees and dappled the walkway in a pattern I used to think of as cheerful. But today, as the driver lifted my bags from the trunk, I saw them. 4 suitcases lined up in a neat row, like sentinels. The largest had my name tag still affixed, faded script in gold ink. Tucked just beneath the handle was a folded card. Not an envelope, not sealed, just a card, folded once, as if not worth the trouble of more. "If you want to earn your place here, start by making room. Emily." The words sat still in my hand. My thumb pressed lightly into the crease of the paper. I stood very still on the sidewalk, the heat of the cab's exhaust wafting over my legs. The driver asked if I wanted help bringing the bags in. I shook my head and managed a polite smile. "No, thank you." He nodded and drove off, leaving behind a growing silence. Inside the house, nothing had changed. The scent of lemon polish lingered faintly in the hallway. The hall mirror reflected the same muted portrait of a home that had, until recently, felt like mine. A week ago, I'd left for Vermont to visit my cousin Marion. Just a short trip, a breather, as Emily had called it. She'd even smiled as she waved me off. "Enjoy yourself. We'll be fine here." And now this. No key under the mat. No text asking if I needed a ride. Just the note, and the suitcases, and the unmistakable air of having been quietly evicted without the word. I unlocked the door with my spare, the one Brad didn't know I kept tucked inside the hem of my umbrella. I stepped in and closed the door behind me with care, so it wouldn't creak. In the foyer, someone had moved the umbrella stand. My slippers were gone from the mat. A small detail, perhaps, but enough to set my pulse to a slow, deliberate beat. There was no anger. Not yet. Just the unmistakable scent of distance settling in. I didn't say anything to Brad that evening. I heard him come in after dark, keys jingling, the low hum of conversation with Emily in the kitchen, her laugh clipped and sharp like glass tapping on glass. I sat in the quiet of the guest room, where my bags now stood at the foot of the bed, untouched. It was the room I'd helped repaint last fall, cool sage green, to freshen things up, Emily had said. I remembered carefully edging the corners while Brad installed new blinds. She'd brought us lemonade halfway through and told me how grateful she was for all the little things I did. The lemonade had been too sweet. I sat on the bed, watching the shadows move across the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of silverware. No one came to check on me. No footsteps paused outside my door. Just the slow unfolding of silence, the kind that accumulates like dust in a house that still looks lived in but no longer feels it. The next morning, I moved through the kitchen like a visitor. Emily glanced up from her laptop, offered a vague smile. "You're back early." "I took the train," I said. "Got in sooner than expected." She nodded. Said nothing more. Brad didn't come down until nearly noon. When he did, he patted my shoulder in passing and asked how Marion was. I told him she was well. He nodded and poured himself a cup of coffee. No questions about the trip. No mention of the note. Just surface-level civility, like two neighbors in a waiting room. Over the next days, small humiliations began to collect around me like leaves swept into corners. My favorite tea vanished from the cupboard. A framed photo of my late husband and me, one that used to sit on the hallway table, was no longer there. Emily said she was rearranging, trying to make the space feel less cluttered. She used the word efficiently, as though tidying me away were a practical matter. I offered to help with the girls, my granddaughters, ages 6 and 9, who used to call me Nana with sticky hands and open arms. Emily thanked me but said they were adjusting to a new routine. "We don't want to confuse them," she added with a polite shrug. I began noticing mail addressed to me left unopened on the counter, tucked beneath grocery lists and catalogs. I asked about the home insurance renewal. Brad waved me off. "It's handled," he said. No eye contact. At book club, when I mentioned our upcoming family dinner, Emily gave a little laugh and murmured, "Oh, Linda, always the traditionalist." A few others smiled politely. One woman glanced at me with something that might have been pity. I began staying upstairs more. Reading old mysteries I'd already read. Making a single cup of tea and sipping it slowly by the small window in what used to be my corner, a chair by the bookshelf, where the light came in warm and gold in the late afternoon. One day, I came down and found the chair moved to the basement. A beanbag now sat in its place. "Oh," I said aloud, but no one heard me. That evening, I stood in the laundry room folding a towel when I overheard their voices in the garage. The door was slightly ajar. "It'll be perfect," Brad said. "We just clear out the rest of her things, insulate the back wall, maybe put in a half bath. She won't even need to go upstairs." Emily's voice followed, light and clipped. "And we'll finally have space for the remodel. The appraiser said we could get a great return if we update the kitchen and open the floor plan." "Mom won't mind," Brad said. "She'll understand once it's done." There was a pause. Then Emily added, "Besides, she's lucky to be here. We've made so many sacrifices already." I didn't move. I just stood there, hands pressed to the soft cotton of the towel, heart slowing to a heavy, deliberate thud. When they walked back inside, I stepped back into the shadows. They didn't see me. They didn't look. The next morning, I walked out to the garage and saw my boxes, my winter coats, holiday dishes, old photo albums, stacked in a corner, taped and labeled. My name written in Sharpie. Mom's things. The boxes looked like they belonged to someone who'd already left. I didn't ask questions. I didn't say a word. Instead, I went to the study, opened the bottom drawer where I kept a folder marked mortgage, and began to reread every document I'd signed over the years. My name was on every line. Every payment. I had bought the house outright after Harold died, naming Brad as co-owner only for inheritance ease. I traced my finger over the ledger. Every check. Every detail. I still had the originals. The equity was mine. The next afternoon, while Brad and Emily were out with the girls, I packed a small overnight bag, called Susan Rolfe, an old friend from church who'd once mentioned having a guest cottage, and drove 3 towns over. No note. No goodbye. Just the click of the latch behind me. At Susan's, the cottage smelled of cedar and old books. The windows opened easily, and the light came in soft through the sheer curtains. I slept better that night than I had in months. In the morning, I logged into my online bank account, printed out every payment confirmation for the mortgage. Then I called a real estate attorney. I didn't speak quickly. I didn't use words like revenge or confrontation. I asked simple, clear questions. Could I file an equitable lien on the property? Could I freeze the sale of the house? The attorney, a young woman with a calm voice, said yes. She'd seen it before. "Come in," she said. "We'll talk options." So I did. The house couldn't be sold without my consent. Not with my name on the deed. Not with the paper trail of years. I also filed a notice of ownership and scheduled a valuation of my share. Then I called Mrs. Talbot, who used to run the Morning Brew Cafe before retiring last winter. She'd offered to leave it to a family friend. Her niece turned it down. I wasn't a family friend, but I'd brought muffins every Sunday and helped her once after a fall in the parking lot. She remembered. "It's yours if you want it," she said. "The lease is simple. Just pay the utilities and treat it with care." I signed the lease that Friday. On Monday, I posted a photo on Facebook, me behind the counter, apron on, fresh pot of coffee brewing. The caption read, "New chapter. Same heart." By the end of the week, 30 people had commented. Regulars came by just to say hello. Brad saw it too. I know because he called that night. Mom, he said, his voice tight, what is going on? I told him gently, I've made other arrangements. You're putting everything at risk, he said. Emily and I had plans. The house was never yours to sell, I said. He paused. Then quieter, you blindsided us. I smiled at the empty cafe around me. No, I said. I simply stepped out of the way. The cafe was quiet that morning, just as I liked it. I had unlocked the door at 6:15 a.m., as the sky still held that faint bluish tint of sleep. The air smelled of cinnamon and ground espresso, and I moved slowly behind the counter, wiping surfaces already clean. There was something soothing in the repetition, in placing mugs just so, in folding the soft cloth napkins. A different kind of home. The first customer came in at 6:42, an older man with a weary face who ordered black coffee and left exact change. I thanked him, and he nodded but didn't speak. I liked him immediately. By 7:30, a few more had trickled in, postal workers, a school nurse, one of the librarians. Familiar faces, all kind. No one asked about my son. No one asked why I had left. By noon, I had sold out of my second tray of buttermilk scones. That evening, after the last customer left, I swept the floor and checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Brad. 1 voicemail. I didn't listen to it. I placed the phone face down. But I read the email that came an hour later. Subject, please talk to us. Emily had written it. I could tell by the clipped tone, the practiced pleasantries. She said they didn't understand what I was doing, that this wasn't like me. That the lien on the house had thrown their financial plans into chaos. She asked, no, urged, that I reconsider. She wrote, we are still family, Linda. No mention of the suitcases. No mention of the note. Still family. I didn't reply. 2 days later, Brad appeared at the cafe. He came in around closing time, his tie slightly askew, a small crease between his eyebrows that reminded me of when he was 8 and had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball. I wiped my hands on a towel and stood behind the counter. Mom, he said. I nodded. Brad. He looked around, as if unsure how to begin. The lien, he said finally, we didn't expect that. I know. You're upset, and I get that. But this affects everything. The refinance, the remodel, we were counting on that equity. I said nothing. I poured a glass of water and slid it across the counter to him. He didn't touch it. Emily says you're acting out of spite, he continued, quieter now. That you're trying to punish us. I looked at him then, really looked, and said, Emily doesn't understand me. She never tried to. He winced slightly. Look, I'm sorry if things felt tense. We've been under pressure. With the business loan and the girls' tuition, we just. I raised my hand gently. You don't have to explain. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to fix anything for you anymore, either. His lips parted, but no words came. I watched as he swallowed, then looked down at the water glass. We didn't mean to push you out, he said finally. You didn't need to say it, I said. You wrote it. On a note. Taped to my suitcase. He closed his eyes briefly. That wasn't meant to hurt you. I nodded. But it did. The silence settled between us like fog. I wiped a crumb from the counter. The cafe clock ticked steadily. We're family, he tried again, softer now. Can't we work this out? I'm sure you'll be fine, I said. You've got a beautiful home, 2 bright girls, and plenty of ambition. You'll figure it out. He looked at me, not with anger, but with something like recognition. As if seeing, for the first time, that I wasn't coming back. I miss the way things used to be, he said. I offered him a sad smile. So do I. He left without finishing the water. That night, Emily called. I didn't answer. She sent a message instead. You're being very dramatic. This isn't healthy. We had a plan. I turned off the phone. The following week, I visited the attorney's office. She had completed the lien paperwork, filed with the county. Everything in order. I signed the final page with the same pen I used to write checks for Brad's first car, for their wedding deposit, for the girls' camp fees. Then I walked out into the sunlight, alone but sure. They tried again, of course. Another message. Then a letter. It was printed on ivory cardstock, folded neatly, delivered by hand, likely Emily's touch. It asked for a meeting. A chance to talk things through. To reset the tone. I agreed. Not for them. For me. We met at Alex Monroe's office, my late husband's former colleague. Neutral ground. Emily wore navy and pearls. Brad looked tired. They talked first. They said the lien had complicated everything. That they understood my frustration but felt blindsided. That the home, my home, was their foundation. That they had made plans, big plans, and had counted on certain assumptions. Then they said the word that made my stomach twist. Forgiveness. As if this had been a misunderstanding. A minor conflict. Something to brush over with grace and closure. I sat still. Listened. Then placed a small folder on the table. Inside, copies of the mortgage payments. My notarized ownership documents. A photograph of the note Emily had left on my suitcase. I closed the folder and looked them both in the eye. I'm not here to play your games, I said. My home, and my dignity, aren't yours to decide. Emily looked away first. Brad's shoulders sagged. I loved you both, I said quietly. I still do. But love isn't permission. And silence isn't weakness. There was no shouting. No raised voices. Just the gentle scrape of a chair as I stood. I wish you well, I said. But we are done. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves along the sidewalk. I pulled my cardigan closer and walked slowly back to the cafe. That evening, I closed the register at 5 o'clock sharp and sat on the front steps, watching the street grow dusky with light. No victory. No revenge. Just peace. The morning settled into rhythm. I'd wake before 6, the old ache in my hips guiding me gently out of bed. The floorboards in Susan's guest cottage creaked just enough to remind me that I wasn't young, but not so much that it felt unfamiliar. I liked the honesty in them. There's something comforting about a space that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. At the cafe, I moved slower than I used to. The coffee brewed quietly while I unstacked the chairs, lined them up against the windows just the way Mrs. Talbot had taught me. There was a grace to the repetition, placing the sugar jars, folding napkins, wiping the counters even when they were already clean. 1,000 small acts that belonged only to me now. Local high schoolers came in after classes. A few offered to help, and I began giving short shifts to those who showed patience. Mia, a soft-spoken girl with a sketchbook always half open. Caleb, who never looked me directly in the eye but learned how to steam milk with surprising delicacy. I paid them modestly, in cash, and let them sit at the corner table after hours when they needed quiet. It felt like planting seeds, quiet, stubborn ones that might bloom later. I rarely thought of the house anymore. Only when I passed the farmer's market and saw the same ceramic bowls Emily used to display on the dining room hutch. Or when I spotted the brand of shampoo I used to keep in the guest bathroom. These were not wounds, just echoes. Soft reminders of a chapter closed without ceremony. Until Sophie came. She was 10 now, Brad's youngest. I hadn't seen her in almost 6 weeks, not since I left. She walked into the cafe one afternoon, holding a paper cup too large for her hands. Rebecca was with her, Brad's niece, Emily's sister's girl, all grown now and studying nearby. She smiled as they approached. "Nana," Sophie said, her voice low but clear. I stood still behind the counter, unsure if I should cross the space between us. But Sophie didn't wait. She came around and wrapped her arms around my waist, the way she used to do when she was small and full of questions about clouds and crickets and the names of wildflowers. I held her gently. Rebecca nodded once. She insisted. Sophie looked up at me. Mom said you were mad at us. I'm not mad, I said. Just quiet now. She considered this. Will you still come to the Christmas recital? I don't think I'm invited anymore. Her brow furrowed. But I want you there. I know. Rebecca guided her to a table by the window. They sat and shared a slice of the spice cake I had baked that morning. I watched from a distance, unsure whether to feel warmth or ache. Both came. Later that week, Brad appeared again. Not at the cafe, but at the edge of Susan's property. He didn't come up to the door. Just stood by the fence, hands in his jacket pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. I watched him from the window. He didn't knock. Just waited, then left. I didn't follow. The lien remained. My lawyer handled the rest. Quietly, efficiently. There would be no sale, no remodel. The equity was locked. My portion protected. Emily sent one more letter. A polite inquiry about negotiated terms. My attorney replied in kind. Terms could be discussed if debts were acknowledged. Until then, there was nothing to discuss. She didn't respond. Instead, the silence stretched longer. No more calls. No more emails. Just the soft hum of my own life returning. On Thursdays, I began hosting poetry readings in the cafe. Nothing grand, just a few locals reading their favorite lines. I served peppermint tea and oatmeal cookies. A retired teacher named Glenn recited Robert Frost with trembling hands. A college student read from a leather-bound journal and wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The room held its breath for each stanza. And finally, I exhaled. At night, I sat on the porch with a small lantern and reread old letters from Harold. He had been a quiet man, prone to underlining sentences in novels and scribbling grocery lists in the margins. His handwriting still calmed me. One letter stood out, dated March 1983, written after a fight we'd had about money. He had written, "Linda, your heart always gives too fast. Just remember, it's not selfish to close the door sometimes." I folded the letter slowly and slipped it back into its envelope. Then one afternoon, while scrubbing down the espresso machine, the door opened and Emily walked in. She looked different. Tired, thinner. The pearls were gone. She wore plain jeans and a coat 2 years out of style. Her hands were bare, no rings. She approached the counter carefully, like someone entering a chapel. I said nothing. "I came to ask," she began, "if you'd consider lifting the lien." My hands continued wiping the machine. The cloth moved slowly, deliberately. "We're selling," she said. "We can't afford to stay. The girls need stability." I nodded once. "Then you'll sell." "I won't stop that." She blinked. "But the lien will ensure I receive what I paid for. No more. No less." Emily looked at me then, truly looked. Her lips pressed together. "I didn't mean for things to go this way," she said. "But they did." She hesitated. "Brad never wanted." I raised my hand gently. "Please don't speak for him." Emily looked down, then placed something on the counter, a folded page. A drawing. Sophie's handwriting scrawled at the top. "To Nana. Please come to my concert. I miss you." She left it there and walked out without another word. That night, I taped the note to the cafe fridge. I didn't cry. The next day, I added a sign to the window. "Closed Sundays, for quiet." I didn't explain it. Didn't need to. It was my cafe now. My rhythm. My silence. My name, still written in fading paint above the door, meant something again. And I had no intention of giving it back. The Sunday quiet suited me. It began with the gentle scrape of slippers on the wood floor, the smell of weak tea steeping slowly, and the rustle of newspaper pages I no longer had to share. The cafe stayed closed, but I still came in, mornings only. I'd water the herbs in the windowsill, check the back door latch, and occasionally rearrange the jars of biscotti, not because they needed it, but because I liked the order. Outside, the street lay hushed, the shop still shuttered. I could hear birds again, warblers, I think. Or maybe finches. The names didn't matter. They sounded like freedom. By mid-morning, I walked to the hardware store, nodding at Mr. Calhoun, who always swept his step with an unnecessary vigor. He'd asked once, early on, if I needed help with my locks, my lighting, even my bookshelves. I declined, kindly. I had learned to do things on my own again. Some afternoons, Rebecca dropped by. She didn't ask for updates, didn't pry. She brought rolls of fresh butcher paper for the cafe menus, jars of her mother's jam, once even a carton of eggs from a neighbor's hens. We'd sit by the counter while she sketched ideas for the mural she wanted to paint on the cafe's back wall. A tree, she said. Something rooted. Something unshakable. You okay with that, Nana? I think it fits. On the third Sunday of the month, I noticed a folded flyer tucked under the cafe door. At first, I thought it was a coupon or church announcement, but when I picked it up, I saw it was a real estate listing, my old home, Brad and Emily's. A photo of the kitchen, my kitchen, newly staged with modern stools and fresh orchids. I studied the image for a moment, noting what they'd changed. They had painted the walls white. Covered the old oak floor with rugs that tried too hard. Beneath the photo, the price. Reduced. I set the flyer on the counter and went about wiping down the windows. That afternoon, Sophie returned. Alone this time. She stood outside the door for a moment before pushing it open, her face flushed, clutching a manila envelope against her chest. I set down my cloth and waited. She crossed the room slowly, placed the envelope on the counter. Dad said I shouldn't come, she whispered. I didn't answer. She opened the envelope. Inside were drawings, dozens, maybe more. Crayon, pencil, markers. Some were folded. One had a coffee ring on the corner. I recognized the curve of my smile in each one. Stick figure nanas holding mugs, watering plants, reading to little girls. I made these, she said. I didn't know if I'd get to give them to you. I touched the edge of one paper. A drawing of 2 chairs under a tree. One was empty. Thank you, Sophie. Can I come on Sundays? Just to draw? I hesitated for only a breath. Yes. We didn't tell Brad. The weeks passed. Leaves turned. A light frost whispered across the cafe windows. Rebecca finished the mural, a large tree stretching up the back wall, branches wide, roots curling into the floorboards. Customers noticed it immediately. Who painted that? They asked. My granddaughter. Somewhere around the 8th week, Emily sent a message. Not an email. A handwritten card on cream stock. It read simply. The house closes next month. I've moved in with my sister. Brad's renting a place near his new job. Sophie will stay with me full-time. No apology. No explanation. Just logistics. At the bottom, a small note. I assume the lien will be resolved with the sale. Let us know where to forward your portion. I folded the card, placed it inside the kitchen drawer with the salt spoons and string. They were moving on. But so was I. At the next poetry night, Glenn read a poem called Inheritance. It wasn't about money. It was about names. About what gets passed down when no one is looking. Silence. Kindness. The way a person folds a shirt or makes toast. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't cry. Just pressed my thumb to the edge of the table and breathed until the moment passed. In early winter, I bought a new sign for the cafe. Just a small one. It read, "Still here." No neon. No flourish. Just those two words. The first snow came gently, brushing rooftops and porch railings with a whisper, like someone too polite to interrupt. I watched it from the cafe window, standing still behind the register as flakes danced beneath the street lamp. The air inside was warm, faintly spiced with cinnamon and cloves from the last batch of cider I'd warmed on the stove. I didn't light the fireplace that night. I liked the quiet cold against the glass, the stillness of a world softened by snow. I had stopped checking for messages from Brad. Stopped expecting anything more than silence, which by now felt more honest than apology. But the quiet didn't sting anymore. It just settled. Most days passed without mention of them. Customers filled the cafe, small families, college students, the retired chorus director who came every Thursday to read the classifieds as if auditioning each job aloud. They smiled. They lingered. They didn't ask about the mural or the woman who poured their coffee with slow, sure hands. But in the corners of conversation, I heard things. That Emily was struggling to find her footing again. That Brad's new rental was smaller than the garage they once offered to convert. That Sophie had asked her teacher if grandparents could sue their children. The teacher had called Emily, who called the school board. I didn't respond to gossip. I only served coffee. But I noticed when the real estate listing for my old house vanished from the market. Sold. One morning, I received a package at the cafe. Brown paper, no return address. Inside, a check from the title company, my portion of the sale per the lien. No note. No acknowledgement. Just the number I had expected, printed clean and correct in black ink. I placed it in my apron pocket and continued prepping the soup for that afternoon. I deposited it the next day, quietly, with Mrs. Elkin at the local bank. She looked up at me after scanning the amount, eyes wide behind her glasses. "That's a blessing," she said. I nodded. "It's mine." With that money, I didn't travel. I didn't upgrade the cafe or buy a new car. I simply repaired the roof of the guest cottage, refinished the cafe's floors, and gave Mia and Caleb raises. When Rebecca came by, she noticed the changes. "You could do more with it," she said gently. "You've got room now. For growth." I smiled. "I'm not trying to grow. I'm trying to stay." She didn't press. She knew better than most that some things don't need to be bigger, they need to be quieter, deeper, better rooted. That Sunday, Sophie came again. She had a small sketchbook tucked under one arm and a thermos her mother probably didn't know she carried. We sat together by the window, our breath fogging the glass. She didn't ask about the house. She didn't ask why I had left. Instead, she asked, "Did you ever think about just forgiving them?" I looked at her. 10 years old. Still hopeful. "I did," I said. And then I remembered that forgiveness isn't the same as permission. She nodded slowly. "I think they miss you. I think they miss what I did for them." She turned back to her drawing. "I miss you." "I know," I said. "And I'm still here." It snowed again that night. After I closed the cafe, I stood by the mural and looked at the tree. Rebecca had signed it in tiny letters, right at the base of the trunk. I traced the shape with my fingertip. Outside, the wind lifted the snow in soft spirals. No phone calls. No notes tucked under suitcases. No whispered insults behind polite smiles. Just the quiet rhythm of a life reclaimed, leaf by leaf, root by root. By February, the mornings had grown brighter again, sunlight stretching longer over the cafe windows, casting familiar lines along the wood-paneled floor. I had started keeping a vase of fresh eucalyptus on the counter. Customers commented on the smell, earthy, clean. They didn't know I kept it because Harold once said it reminded him of the coast, and I liked the idea of him lingering in the air. Business had steadied. Not booming, but faithful. Locals came for the calm more than the coffee. Some brought books, others their worries. I offered them a place to sit and something warm to hold. That was enough. Sophie visited most Sundays now. Sometimes Rebecca came with her, sometimes she arrived alone, quietly slipping into the chair by the window as if she belonged to the space. And in a way, she did. That morning, she brought a school essay. "I had to write about someone I admire," she said, sliding the paper across the table. I unfolded it with care. It was titled, "Still Here." She wrote about me, not as a grandmother, but as a woman who'd built something steady out of what others tried to scatter. She didn't mention the house or the lean. Just the cafe, the eucalyptus, the silence. "She doesn't yell," Sophie had written, "but somehow, you always hear her." My throat tightened. I folded the page and held it lightly in my hands. "Thank you," I said, quietly. Sophie looked down. "Mom thinks I shouldn't come so often." "She's worried?" "She says it confuses things." I nodded. "Does it confuse you?" She shook her head. I reached across the table, placed my hand gently over hers. "Then come as you like." She stayed the afternoon. Drew a cat asleep on a windowsill. Told me about a school play. Asked if I'd ever wanted to be a teacher. I said no. I'd wanted to be a woman who stayed soft, even when the world tried to harden her. Sophie didn't understand the words just yet, but I think she felt them. That evening, after she left, I locked the door and made tea. Outside, the street shimmered with frost. I opened my notebook and began to write. Not a list. Not a ledger. Just memories. How I used to braid Rebecca's hair before church. The way Brad once left a tulip on my bedside table after I'd scolded him for skipping homework. The scent of Emily's perfume when she first hugged me, before words became weapons, before gratitude turned to expectation. I didn't write with bitterness. Only memory. Some names I wrote smaller than others. Some I underlined. Once. In March, the cafe marked its 1-year anniversary. I didn't plan a celebration. But customers brought flowers, and someone, Caleb, I think, hung a small paper banner that read, "To another year." I stood beneath it that morning, hands dusted with flour, apron heavy with warmth. A woman who had walked in once with hesitation now came with purpose. I had grown into the place. Or maybe it had grown around me. The past came knocking only once more. Brad. He arrived near closing time, not asking for entry, just standing outside the glass, hands deep in his coat pockets. He looked thinner. Older. I walked to the door, unlocked it slowly. "May I come in?" I nodded. He stepped inside, the air between us cooler than the night air. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "Just wanted to say. I see it now." I waited. "I see what we did. Or didn't do. How we let you become convenient." The word settled like a pin dropped on linoleum. "You needed more," he continued. "And we gave you less." "I needed respect," I said. "Not more." He looked down, nodded. "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. But it was more than I expected." "I can't change what happened," he said. "No," I agreed. I hope you're okay." I looked around the cafe. The mural. The worn tables. The eucalyptus. "I'm more than okay." He looked like he wanted to say something else. But he didn't. Just placed a small envelope on the counter. "For Sophie's recital," he said. "If you want to come." Then he turned and left. I didn't open the envelope until later. It wasn't a ticket. Just a drawing. 2 chairs. A coffee cup. And a tree. Underneath, in Sophie's hand. Nana's place. I didn't cry. I turned off the lights. Stepped outside. Locked the door behind me. The street was quiet. Still. Mine. April came quietly. The last traces of frost melted into the soil, and the cafe's front windows, once dulled by winter condensation, grew clearer each day. I planted snapdragons in the rusted troughs outside, pale yellow and deep coral. They struggled at first, as things do when the earth forgets how to hold warmth. But they stood. Stubborn and slight. I liked them immediately. Inside, the cafe smelled of orange peel and fresh bread. Mia had started baking in the early hours, her shy confidence slowly blooming into something graceful. Caleb stayed after shifts to sand the new shelf he insisted the tea jars deserved. Rebecca painted a second tree, this one smaller, a sapling beside the first, curling upward with quiet hope. I didn't say much. Just let it grow. Sundays remained ours. Mine and Sophie's. She came with sketchbooks now, not questions. Her silences had grown longer, more thoughtful. She brought new pens, colored ones, and once a tiny thermos of tea she had steeped herself. "Needs more honey," she said after the first sip. I nodded. One Sunday, she asked if I had ever been in love after Harold. "No," I answered simply. "Not even once?" "There wasn't room," I said, "not when I'd made a life out of being needed." She stared at her drawing for a long time. "I don't want to be needed like that. I want to be chosen." I looked at her. "You will be. Just remember to choose yourself first." She didn't answer, but she smiled. The recital came. I went. I sat near the back, away from the other parents, wrapped in a navy coat with gloved hands folded in my lap. Sophie stood center stage in a plain white dress, her hair pulled back simply. She sang without flourish, steady, quiet, clear. Afterward, Brad nodded at me from across the auditorium. I nodded back. That was enough. Emily wasn't there. I walked home slowly that night. The air was cool but not sharp. Along the sidewalk, tulips had begun to press upward, just daring. Back at the cafe, I lit a small candle and sat by the front window. No customers. No conversation. Just quiet. Later that week, I received a letter, handwritten, thick envelope, no return address but unmistakably Emily's handwriting. I recognized the precise loops, the way her lowercase g curved almost upward. I waited 2 days before opening it. Inside, 4 pages. A carefully written apology, but not the kind people give when they want forgiveness. The kind they write when they need to speak without interruption. She admitted to fear. Of aging. Of scarcity. Of being overwhelmed by what she thought adulthood should look like. She said she hadn't meant to erase me, just didn't know how to share space with someone who'd once been the center of everything. I didn't know how to be close to someone I couldn't control, she wrote. She ended with, "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I've started therapy. Sophie says you're doing well. I'm glad." There was no return address. Just her name at the bottom. I didn't write back. But I didn't throw the letter away either. I placed it in the small wooden box under the counter, beside the deed to the cafe and Harold's last note, and the napkin Sophie once folded into a paper crane. Sometimes we keep things not because we want to revisit them, but because they mark the distance we've traveled. Summer came. The cafe door stayed open most afternoons, the scent of thyme and sugar drifting into the street. More neighbors came by. I started offering iced hibiscus tea in mason jars. Rebecca's tree mural became a talking point. Sophie added butterflies to it one afternoon, tiny, deliberate brushstrokes. "Do you mind?" she asked. "No," I said. "They belong." One evening, as I wiped down the counter, I caught my reflection in the glass, hair grayer than ever, face quiet but firm. I didn't look young. I didn't look broken. I looked like someone who had learned how to stop apologizing for taking up space. There was no moment of triumph. No final act of revenge. Just peace. Long earned and slowly built. A life of my own. Still here. By midsummer, I no longer thought of the cafe as something I was protecting. It had become something I was simply living inside. Not a fortress, not a monument, just a rhythm. The bell above the door, the scrape of chairs against worn floors, the hush before the first cup is poured. The days began early now. Sometimes, I would sit with my coffee before opening, watching the morning light bend across the tile, my breath still soft from sleep. I liked that hour. No customers. No Sophie. No questions. Just the echo of Harold's voice in my memory, teasing me gently about the way I always stirred my tea clockwise. I kept the cafe simple, 3 types of bread each week, 2 soups per day, and whatever dessert Mia felt brave enough to try. Our regulars appreciated it. No need for novelty here. Just warmth. Reliability. Caleb took to writing small messages on the chalkboard by the door. You are enough. No one else gets to define your worth. Still here. People noticed. Some took photos. A few left notes tucked under the register. I read them at night, alone, in the back room. Sophie still came on Sundays. Always quietly, always on time. Her drawings had matured, more detail, more confidence in the lines. She showed me one she called The Woman by the Window. It looked nothing like me and exactly like me. Rebecca painted a small corner with blue forget-me-nots. She said they suited the cafe's tone. Soft resilience. I didn't argue. One afternoon, I received a visit I hadn't expected. It was Anna Monroe, Alex's wife. She came in for a chamomile tea and lingered longer than usual. Her tone was cautious. Brad stopped by the firm, she said. Wanted to ask about transferring ownership of his new property. I nodded. I knew he had moved again. A smaller house, closer to Sophie's school. Anna sipped her tea, then added, he asked about making sure it couldn't be taken. Not even by family. I said nothing. She leaned in a little. I think he's trying to do things differently now. I hope so, I said. Do you want to meet with him? She asked. I shook my head. I've already had my meeting. That was enough. That night, I reopened the wooden box. Emily's letter was still there. I reread it slowly, then folded it again and placed it beneath Harold's note. I added something new, Sophie's sketch of the woman by the window. Not because I needed to remember, but because some things deserve to be held. Later that week, Sophie didn't come. She'd told me in advance, camp, 2 weeks, art program. She hugged me at the door the Sunday before and said, all right. And she did. A postcard arrived that Friday. A watercolor of a pine grove. Her handwriting in blue ink. I told them about you. How you made a life out of quiet things. They didn't understand it. That made me like you more. I smiled, placed the card under the register, and served the next customer. One morning in August, I walked into the cafe and found a gift on the counter. No tag. A small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside, a fresh jar of marmalade, a photograph of the tree mural at dusk, and a folded card that read, you made space, even when they tried to shrink you. Thank you. I didn't recognize the handwriting. That evening, I closed early. Sat at the table by the window and watched the wind stir the petals of the snapdragons. A car passed slowly, then another. The street settled again. I thought of how it all began, not with shouting, not with slammed doors, but with 4 suitcases and a single note. If you want to earn your place here. And how I had. But not in the way they meant. Not through servitude. Not through compliance. Through presence. Through refusal. Through making room for myself. Not for revenge. For return. Summer faded slowly, like breath against glass. The evenings lengthened, the cafe lights flickering on earlier, casting their amber glow across the sidewalk. I began closing the windows sooner, lighting a candle by the register out of habit more than need. The rhythm held. Bread, tea, laughter. Quiet. I no longer looked for signs of the past returning. I no longer flinched when someone asked about family. One Thursday near the end of August, Brad came for coffee. He didn't announce himself. Just stood in line like anyone else, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. When he reached the counter, I waited. "Medium black," he said. Then, after a pause, "Please." I poured it, set it down, watched his hand shake slightly as he reached for the cup. He looked up. "You look well." "I am." "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "For what?" "For making me stop and look at what I was doing. What I became." I nodded. "And who helped you do that?" He smiled faintly. "Mostly Sophie. And time." He didn't stay long. Just sipped once, left a 5 on the counter, and whispered, "I'm sorry," before slipping out the door. I watched his back retreat down the street, smaller than I remembered. Then I turned the sign to closed, though it wasn't yet noon. I sat by the window for a long time. Not grieving. Not triumphant. Just still. Later that week, I received another letter, this time from Sophie. She'd returned from camp and wanted to spend a Sunday not drawing, but baking. "You always made things," she wrote. "I want to make something with you." We made lemon biscuits. She laughed when we got the flour ratios wrong. I didn't mind. As we waited for them to rise, she looked at me and asked, "Do you think people can change?" "Some," I said. "When they stop expecting applause for it." She nodded, then stood to check the oven. When they were done, we sat on the porch outside the cafe, biscuits warm in our hands, the street quiet except for the faint rustle of trees. "Nana," she said, her voice soft. "Do you think you'll ever move back in with them?" I smiled gently. "No, sweetheart." "Because they hurt you?" "No," I said. "Because I remembered who I am." She leaned her head against my shoulder. We watched the sun drift lower. Inside, the cafe stood empty, but not lonely. The mural glowed faintly in the evening light. The trees, both painted and real, stood steady in the stillness. When she left, she hugged me tighter than usual. That night, I walked through the cafe one last time before locking up. I paused by the door, hand resting on the sign that still read, "Still here." Outside, the stars had begun to scatter across the dark. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, turned, and looked back through the glass. My reflection stared back, older, yes, lined with all that had been endured, but rooted. I whispered into the quiet. "I didn't just earn my place, I reclaimed it." And turned off the lights.